The dust, it was the dust that got him. Not the fine, sterilized dust of his executive office, but the coarse, red clay dust of the past, now swirling in violent, choking clouds. Dr. Elias Nogueira, a renowned architect whose firm specialized in high-end urban renewal, stood across the temporary chain-link fence. His reflection was distorted on the polished surface of the heavy machinery. Where his childhood home once stood, where the mango tree grew and the scent of laundry always lingered, was now a barren, apocalyptic pit. The foundations, the very bones of his past, were being ripped out to make way for a luxury high-rise. He wore a bespoke Italian suit, yet his feet ached with the memory of the bare, calloused feet of his youth. His eyes, usually sharp and calculating, were fixed on a small, exposed patch of foundation wall near the back. The foreman, recognizing the architect who signed the final demolition approval, approached him, hesitant. Elias waved him off. "Just a moment," his voice was gravely, unused to speaking simple words. He stepped gingerly over the rubble, and there, dislodged by the bulldozer's powerful teeth, was a single sun-baked brick. It was a common, cheap brick, but a lifeline to a forgotten day. Elias knelt, ignoring the clay staining his expensive trousers. He picked up the brick. It was warm, heavy, and on its surface, etched clumsily with a nail or a sharp stone, was a faint inscription: Inda and T forever, Nascimento and Teo, the initials of his best friend and the neighborhood's silent king. Elias remembered etching that brick 40 years ago, on the sweltering afternoon of his 12th birthday. It was a promise of eternal loyalty, sealed on the foundation of the home they thought would stand forever. But that promise shattered months later, when the Betrayal Nova era arrived with its glossy black cars, its threats, and its money. He remembered the day the black sedan belonging to the foreman, the one they all called the Viper, parked outside Nascimento's small, proud house. He remembered the shouts, the panic, the sound of a struggle, and he remembered, specifically, the muffled cry that seemed to be swallowed by the long, dark trunk of the foreman's car. Nascimento was inside. Elias didn't call the police. He didn't run for help. He froze, hidden behind the clothesline. Later, Nascimento was the one who emerged, pale and defeated, signing the papers that doomed the neighborhood. Elias had forever believed that Nascimento, the son of the poorest family, had betrayed them all for a small, selfish payout. He never spoke to him again. Elias ran his thumb over the crude initials on the brick. The heat of the clay seemed to pulse with an old, unanswered question. Was his entire successful life built on the justified anger of betrayal, or the profound, tragic misunderstanding of a child's sacrifice? Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. The neighborhood of Villa São Jorge, circa 1988, existed in a timeless bubble. It was the era of cheap plastic toys, public telephones with endless lines, and the fierce protective anonymity granted by a world yet untouched by instant connectivity. Life was measured by the smell of diesel and the sound of children's shouts on the dirt soccer field. Elias's house was simple, painted blue, with a generous, unkempt yard that was the true epicenter of his universe. His parents were modest, honest factory workers who believed in the value of their fixed patch of earth. Family relations were defined by proximity and necessity. The father, a quiet man worn down by factory shifts, spoke little, but his presence was a moral anchor. The mother, a woman with hands permanently stained by laundry soap, was the neighborhood's unofficial therapist, trading advice for cups of sugar. And then there was Nascimento. He was Elias's shadow, his alter ego. Nascimento's family was poorer, living in a single-room shack at the edge of the creek, but his spirit was unbound. They shared everything: dreams of becoming professional soccer players, a worn-out ball, and the unspoken pact that one day they would leave Villa São Jorge together. The air of that time was one of collective aspiration, tinged with the fatalism of poverty. Everyone knew the fight was unfair, but their homes, their physical roots, were their only defense. They were all standing on the field of their childhood dreams, unaware that a wealthy hand was already reaching down, preparing to take the ball away forever. That hand belonged to the Betrayal Nova era, and its arrival was signaled by the sleek, dark, silent cars that began began to appear, unsettling the vibrant rhythm of the neighborhood. The atmosphere was a chronica of a death foretold, one that only the maturity of adulthood could fully appreciate. Elias's early childhood was defined by the relentless pursuit of opportunity. His talent was not academic, but the tenacity to never quit. He was the strategist on the soccer field, the one who saw the open play before anyone else. This strategic mind was his first true talent, born from the harsh necessity of scarcity. His memories of poverty were not of hunger, but of the cold shame of having to borrow clothes for the few school ceremonies he attended. This shame fueled his ambition to become someone untouchable. The first great pain arrived with the threat of the sale. Rumors circulated that the new ring road project needed to pass right through Villa São Jorge. The construction company, the dreaded Nova era, represented by the cold, polished foreman they nicknamed the Viper, started offering buyouts. The offers were low, barely enough for a down payment on a decent home elsewhere. The collective trauma peaked on the afternoon of the soccer tournament finals. The entire neighborhood was on the sidelines when the Viper's black sedan pulled up, a Lincoln Continental, imposing and out of place. The Viper went straight to Nascimento's shack. Elias, still panting from the game, saw the confrontation. The Viper, immaculate in his dark suit, spoke with a sinister calm. Nascimento's father, drunk and beaten by life, shouted back, his voice thick with injustice. But then Elias saw Nascimento himself, barely 13, pulled forcefully toward the car. Elias watched, frozen in a paralysis born of fear and incomprehension. The final image before the door slammed shut, Nascimento's eyes wide with a despair that wasn't just fear, but a desperate plea for help. That day, the dream of winning the tournament, of winning a life, ended. Elias had witnessed the cruelest exercise of power, the rich using the poor's children as leverage. The following week, the atmosphere in Villa São Jorge was toxic. No one was accepting the low offers. But then, the unthinkable happened. Nascimento's parents, the poorest and most outspoken against the sale, were the first to sign. They received a paltry sum and left the neighborhood overnight without a word. The community exploded in rage and condemnation. Nascimento and his family were instantly branded traitors. They had broken the collective resistance for a meager, selfish gain. The betrayal felt monumental, personal. Elias, whose future depended on the neighborhood holding strong, felt the deepest cut. He lost his home, his roots, and his best friend in one stroke. He tried to find them, running to the periphery of the new construction sites, desperate for an explanation. He felt robbed, humiliated. The search for Elias was not for a lost object, but for a lost truth, a truth he never received. The great symbolic scene that marked the break was the demolition of Nascimento's shack. Elias watched from a distance as the bulldozer flattened the small wooden structure. In the midst of the dust and wreckage, he saw the Viper standing proudly, a dark figure against the rising sun, holding a small, crumpled piece of paper, the signed deed. In that moment, Elias hardened. His innocence was replaced by a furious, cold ambition. He swore that he would become one of them, one of the men who drove the black cars and dictated the terms of existence. He would steal the power they possessed, not through betrayal, but through relentless success. The memory of Nascimento's face, the image of the crushed shack, became his fuel, his dark catalyst. He would never again be the boy who watched from the sidelines while others destroyed his life. Years later, while cleaning out the family's old storage unit, kept after the eventual sale of their house, Elias found a forgotten shoebox belonging to his mother. Inside, he finds the detritus of their life, old utility bills, a faded school report card, and the small, cracked talisman that Nascimento used to wear. The talisman was a piece of polished riverstone tied with a simple knotted string. Nascimento had always claimed it gave him courage. Elias hadn't seen it since the day of the soccer match. Next to the stone was a fragile, folded envelope. It wasn't addressed to Elias, but to his mother. He recognized Nascimento's shaky, childlike handwriting. Elias opened the envelope. Inside was a tiny, crumpled note written in pencil. Elias's mom, I have to go. He made me sign. The stone is for Elias. Tell him I did it for my little sister. They are paying for her surgery. It wasn't a choice, it was a trade. Tell Elias I didn't betray him. Forgive me. The ground seemed to give way beneath Elias. He clutched the note. The objects had delivered the truth. The talisman was a metaphor for the courage Elias always admired in his friend, now given to him as a final silent gift. The note was the profound revelation that Nascimento, the traitor, had in fact performed an act of ultimate sacrifice. The Viper hadn't paid them off. He had engineered a humanitarian trap. Nascimento's younger sister had a severe congenital heart condition requiring expensive surgery. The money wasn't a profit from a land deal, it was the price of his moral integrity and his bond with Elias. He traded his roots, his honor in the eyes of his friend, and his future to save his sister's life. For 40 years, Elias had clung to the bitter version of the story. Nascimento sold out. This narrative served him well. It gave his ambition a moral compass. He was not selling out. He was achieving what the weak like Nascimento couldn't. The neighborhood theories were savage. Some said Nascimento's father had stolen the money and run to the coast. Others, more sinister, whispered that Nascimento himself, the boy, was corrupted by the scent of cash and had convinced his parents. The rumor that reached Elias's ears, and that truly justified his anger, was that after the sale, Nascimento was seen driving a small, cheap motorcycle, showing off his riches in another part of the city. Elias took this as definitive proof of betrayal. The truth, revealed by the note, shattered his entire adult psychological structure. His success, which he viewed as redemption, was actually a prolonged act of injustice against his friend's memory. The pressure mounted on him now, decades later. He realized that the muffled cry he heard from the black car's trunk wasn't a victim being silenced, but a boy, Nascimento, crying out in despair because he was being forced to choose between his sister's life and his lifelong friendship. Elias had judged him through the cynical lens of adult business, while the reality was a devastating moral compromise made by a frightened child. The world around him, the social contempt, the rumors, had all confirmed his convenient lie, allowing him to sever his emotional connection to the vulnerable life he once lived. The ultimate piercing secret that connected past and present was not just Nascimento's sacrifice, but the reason the Viper knew about the sister's heart condition. Elias discovers, through old hospital records mentioned in an obscure line of the note, that the hospital where Nascimento's sister was treated was financially owned by the Nova-era company. The final, devastating layer of revelation: Nascimento wasn't coerced by the Viper, but by Elias's own father. Elias's father, the man of quiet honor, was suffering from a debilitating illness and was losing his factory job. He knew the neighborhood would eventually fall. He had overheard the parents of Nascimento discussing their daughter's desperate prognosis. In a moment of weakness, fueled by the desire to save his own family from total destitution, by getting a slightly better buyout offer for being one of the last to sell, Elias's father was the one who tipped off the Viper about Nascimento's sister's illness, offering the Viper a clear way to break the neighborhood's resistance. Elias's father then ensured that Elias saw the black car, the confrontation, and the grito. The father fabricated the betrayal, knowing Elias's strategic mind would interpret it as simple greed, thus giving Elias the anger and ambition he needed to escape the poverty his father couldn't escape. The father sacrificed his own integrity and created a monster of ambition in his son, all to guarantee a better future. The ultimate secret was that Elias's greatest success was founded on the deepest, most painful lie his father ever told. Elias stands on the rubble, the red dust settling around him like the slow passage of time itself. He releases the brick, letting it fall back into the earth, returning the promise of N&T forever to the soil that bore it. The sun is low, casting long, melancholic shadows shadows across the construction pit. The light catches the remains of a small rusty pipe, the water connection to his old house, a physical tether to a life that chose sacrifice over shame. He understands now. His entire trajectory, the cold ambition, the distrust of sentiment, the pursuit of the black car lifestyle, was not his own creation, but a legacy of manufactured rage. His father didn't sacrifice his life. He sacrificed his honor and his son's peace of mind to guarantee his escape. Elias pulls out his phone. He searches for the name Nascimento. It takes only seconds in the digital world that replaced the analog, closed-off Villa San Jorge. He finds him, a modest physiotherapist in a small coastal town. His sister is alive and well. Elias looks one last time at the site of his former home. The silence is profound, the silence of a truth finally acknowledged. He is the master architect, but he realizes he has been building his life on a cracked foundation, laid down by a loving lie. The final emotionally charged sentence, resonating with the weight of time, sacrifice, and destiny. The home he spent his life escaping was the only place where the truth could finally find him.